So let me ask you a question. When you were a teenager, how many of you like to sleep in? Okay, you proved my point. When I was growing up, once it was summer, I just wanted to sleep. I'd gotten up before dark every day during the year, woke my parents up, got on the bus to ride for an hour. Sometimes, if a cow had recently given birth, I'd have to go down earlier than that and help milk her until she was dry. The longest days were when I had to stay at school for some activity. And so when I was on summer break, I really just wanted to sleep. So of course, at no later than 8 a.m. on those bucolic open window mornings of summer in New Hampshire, my dad would sit at the picnic table just below my bedroom window and attempt to pick off a woodchuck that was having its way with the vegetable garden about 100 yards down the hill. I don't think he actually ever got it, because if he did, then the game would be over and he'd have to pick something else, another thing to do to get me out of bed. Maybe he'd start the lawnmower or decide that that was the best time to repair the board that had been broken for years, and that was when he wanted to do it. And one last try, he would let our thundering herd of 4 sheep out, and those sheep would chase people, and so their screaming was also an excellent alarm clock. So, but this is one of the stories I tell to prove that how put upon I was in my past. It's one of my victim stories. I tell it because it makes people laugh. It's relatable. Who of us has not been a sleepy teenager or had one? It's also a story of limitation. For as long as I continue to tell it, it remains imprinted in my mind and in my body as my truth. But I've decided to write a new script about this. Maybe my dad wasn't trying to be mean. He just didn't want me to sleep my day away. There was too much of life to be enjoyed. But teenagers don't tend to speak the language of wise elders who know that time is precious. And wise elders tend to forget the energy required to emerge into adulthood. I'm willing to revise this story because of my past experience of these few years that have gone by, and as I've done the work of letting go of those limiting beliefs. I've kept myself pretty high and dry for most of my life by being shy and withdrawn. I've created an entire library of stories about my life where I've been powerless over my circumstances. But that wasn't the truth, of course. It was often just a lack of confidence in taking responsibility for the direction of my life. So I protected myself by hiding from any level of expectation. I avoided dealing with that part of myself by sleeping in. But life has a funny way of poking us awake when we're just about to doze off spiritually. Just over a year ago, in about March, I began to have pain in my right knee, which wasn't unusual. I've had that my whole life and during seasonal changes, and it goes away after about a month. But this time it came with swelling that wouldn't subside. I borrowed some crutches, but when I tried to use them to go to the orthopedist, I found that my thumbs and shoulders couldn't support my weight. I was given a cortisone injection and my knee got better. If you've never had one, avoid it at all costs. I did compare it with childbirth. I know I don't really know what that feels like, but dang it. But it was almost as if the energy that had built up behind the pain in my knee was transferred to the other joints, as though it was trying its damnedest to get my attention. I mentioned this additional pain to my primary physician at my next appointment, and she ordered a blood test, and the results came back positive for rheumatoid arthritis. I'd heard about it, but I had no idea what it was or what you do about it. So, as I usually do, I decided to wait it out. But at about this time last year, the pain became intolerable. I dreaded going to bed at night because I knew that in the morning after lying in one position, I wouldn't be able to get up. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night before I stiffened up, and I'd shuffle to the shower, hoping that the warm water would just melt my frozen joints. It would help briefly, mostly because it was soothing, but I feared slipping and falling and not being able to get up. I made the mistake of trying the bathtub once, and I couldn't get out, so I had to crawl one limb at a time onto the floor and press my head against the toilet to help pull myself up. Because I couldn't do anything, I started to lose muscle mass. When I was finally able to get myself out of bed in the morning, I had to submerge my hands and wrists in a tub of ice water because they felt like balloons full of fire. A medical member of our community offered me some prednisone to take until I could get to a doctor. At first I refused because I wanted to tough it out, but I finally couldn't, and the relief from the medication was swift and immediate. It was intoxicating. It felt like a miracle. But when I went to find a rheumatologist, I was told by all of them that there were no appointments until October, and this was July. And in July of last year, our healthcare system was being overwhelmed by COVID. Like, really, God? So my desperation was growing, and I wasn't getting better, and the prednisone had run out. I thought time and rest would be all I needed, but it was actually getting worse. I wanted to die. I woke up one night screaming in desperation for a way to end the pain. I didn't want to live if this is how it was going to be. I was finally able to get an emergency appointment with a rheumatologist on the other side of town. I strapped on my wrist supports, and after the usual struggle to turn the key in the ignition, which required 2 hands, and I almost couldn't do it, but I would make myself do it because I did not want to be able to do that. So I made the long drive over to USF and found that this office didn't take my insurance. So I stood there in that office and I burst into tears saying, I am dying. But they just watched me drag myself back down the hallway. I was about to give up at that point when, in a rare moment of prayer at that time, I said, God, take me. Little did I know that this was the very surrender my healing had been looking for. It needed me to admit that I was powerless over my situation so that I would allow the co-creative power that was mine to use to take over for me. This was not the kind of powerless that comes from self-pity. It's the kind born of releasing shame. That moment convinced me to stop punishing myself for being human. I finally understood that I didn't have to go through this alone. The next day I got on the internet again to try to find another doctor, and with the very first phone call, I got an appointment that week only 10 miles away. When I shuffled into that office, the doctor looked at me in shock and said, "Why did you wait so long to come and see me?" My blood tests revealed catastrophically high inflammation in my body. It was literally off the charts. They couldn't measure it. The doctor gave me a high dose of prednisone until the RA drugs kicked in, which would take 3 to 4 months. And if you've never been on steroids, I can tell you that roid rage is a thing. I feared for the people around me, so I isolated as much as I could. But the initial drug didn't perform the way it needed to, which was actually a good thing. In order for me to qualify for a better, more effective drug, the first had to prove inadequate. After all those months of waiting and hoping, it was clear that I needed something more powerful. So he said, "Come into my office and I'll start you on infusions every 2 weeks." But again, my insurance wouldn't cover it. And without insurance, this drug would cost the equivalent of buying a decent new car every month, possibly for the rest of my life. I spiraled again, going back to feeling that I was being punished for my choices. But then my good showed up again in the form of the doctor's willingness to provide samples for me until the inflammation was under control. I started to feel hope. I thought maybe I'd be able to work again. Last year, I became aware of a locally made beverage product that helps restore gut health with probiotics. Since I'd had experience in the health, food, and beverage industries, I thought, wow, that's right up my alley. I sent them my resume, and then all this happened. I figured I'd have to give up on this possibility. But the words probiotic and gut health kept showing up on the RA support sites that I visited. And just as I started to improve and get stronger, I was contacted by them to see if I'd be willing to help on their production line. Without hesitation, I said yes, even if I didn't know that I was quite ready. It was time for me to say to Spirit that I was ready to come back to life, and it seemed like this might be a good way to do it. The day I walked in the door of this new workplace, I knew I would heal. This was my new wellness team, the very people I needed to take me through the next phase of my healing journey. Some days at work, we try to come up with marketing slogans that promote what we do in a clever way. One day, one of the owners jokingly said, "Up to no good," and a light bulb went off in my head. That's the way I had been thinking about myself, that my misdeeds in life were proof that I'd been up to no good. But as I've studied this teaching more, my mind now readily goes to the idea of turning around this phrase. I said, what if we change the N-O to K-N-O-W, up to no good? And just like that, today's talk was written. By the way, when I use this phrase again, it will be the K-N-O-W version. Over the past several months, as I've rebuilt much of my strength and dexterity, I've come to really appreciate this philosophy and teaching. It's interesting how struggle can revert us back to our most primal ideas about how things work. The judgmental God that many of us were taught about returns in our moments of vulnerability to remind us that we are unworthy. And our greatest suffering comes from thinking we don't deserve to be well, that wholeness is conditional. This part of us continues to show up even after we think we've got it all figured out. And that's where the spiritual work comes in. Recognizing these old beliefs about ourselves and the patterns in order to reveal a new understanding of them. There's nothing like vulnerability to clear away resistance to digging deeper and finding out what is at the root of pain. Like many businesses, this company I'm working for struggled to hold it together this year. One day I asked one of the owners whether he ever thinks about throwing in the towel and giving up his dream of helping others heal. He said, I just get up every morning, remember why I do what I'm doing, and show up to do it again. The work we do there is hard and sometimes discouraging, but when the intent behind it is to create a world that works for everyone, the right and perfect people show up to support it. His words reminded me of a quote by Deepak Chopra from his book, The 7 Spiritual Laws of Success. I'm going to ask myself how I am best suited to serve humanity. I'm going to answer that question and then put it into practice. I'm going to use my unique talents to serve the needs of my fellow human beings. I will match those needs to my desire and help and serve others. Again, the idea of surrender shows up. Surrender doesn't mean giving up a dream. It means acknowledging that we never have to go it alone. It means loosening our grip on the outcome and relaxing into the rhythm that restores the circulation of life force energy in the body. But first it must come from the mind and a willingness to co-create with the one mind. Like the phrase, up to no good, I realized that my statement, God take me, was not a plea for relief from my suffering. It was an act of surrender. Surrender to the idea that spirit really is within me. I've since revised my statement to say, God take me where I need to go. Let me know my good. In order to claim one's good, any thought of unworthiness or undeservedness must be released in order to restore that circulation. Otherwise, it stays trapped, like the inflammation in my joints. I could have decided to give in to the sort of fate others had described, but I decided to surrender to a higher possibility and get up, regardless of how painful it was. I had to get up to know my good. It's said that when we're ready to learn, the right and perfect teachers show up. When I was ready to heal, when I said, I'm ready to heal, healers of every description stepped forward and wanted to help me. like that fearless group of neighbors who would confront the marauding sheep at the farm and return them to their pen rather than run away and say, "It's not my problem." They were evidence of my good. And I've been amazed by the abundance of it as I reclaim my place in my story and see myself as hero rather than victim, or simply as an expression of spirit, learning to balance the experience of being human. These healers, all of you, are people who so believe in wholeness that it can't help but be so. Instead of feeling shame and refusing expressions of love, I come to understand my vulnerability as part of the opportunity for humanity to step into greater spiritual awareness. Each time I've opened the door to my inner sanctuary, someone has stepped through with ease and grace and said, "I am here." My healing is their healing too. The good that flows through me is the life force energy that some people call God. Therefore, to say up to no good is also to say up to no God. The mystical teacher Jesus said to the lame man, "Take up your bed and walk." And that's what the man did. The power of the conviction of Jesus' words was enough to trigger the man's belief that he was indeed able to walk. This same power is available to all of us and shows up to the degree that we are willing to accept it. Pain, physical, mental, and emotional, is one of our greatest teachers. It has taught me true humility and the power of releasing perceived expectations, which are ultimately just limitations that I place on myself. Ernest Holmes wrote, "In those moments when you let go of all restriction, of all sense of limitation, consciously using your word for definite purposes, you will discover a hidden power of which you have never dreamed." This room is full of teachers and healers, including my sister Roz, who is here visiting today. She connected me with a colleague who gave me another clarifying view of what was going on with me. Rosie said, "Good for you, Ellie. You're choosing wellness." The world is in need of people like her who understand that health is not a miracle, but the result of gentle encouragement to move toward more light. Claiming health is a daily decision to keep showing up and honoring ourselves by being vulnerable and allowing others to share their divine gifts with us, whether as a doctor, a minister, a family member, or a friend. And remembering that any thoughts of perceived inadequacy can and must be changed in order to receive this abundant flow that is the nature of our creative expression. And trust that community, the combined gifts of an intentional group, is the most healing force there is. There haven't been many times in my life where I was genuinely excited to go to work. But every day now, I wake up in gratitude that I get to go to work, that I can go to work. I'm grateful to all of you who have walked beside me as I've learned to walk again, and who have held me in consciousness as I've awkwardly emerged into this new version of myself. A version, incidentally, that I can actually say I really like. Through the process of becoming a science of mind practitioner, I've gained a new understanding of what it means to be healed. Ernest Holmes said that there is nothing to be healed, only truth to be revealed. The truth of my being is that I, like all of you, am an amazing manifestation of this one life that is all life. We each draw to ourselves the perfect experiences and people to guide us through it. And we respond to the call when it is our turn to be one of those people or experiences. Sometimes we represent the answer, and sometimes we are just a catalyst along the way to finding the answer. Healing takes many forms, and the best way I've found to make it happen is to start by getting up to no good. Take a moment with me to anchor that. And to know that, as Brittany said, good cannot be separate. My good is not separate from your good. My healing is not separate from your healing. My truth is not separate from your truth, because it is all connected in the one mind, in the God, in the good. Whatever word you choose to describe that life force energy in you. It is here in all of us, spreading and growing as we share the truth of our beings with others and show up to help heal when it is our turn to do so. And so it is.
So it is.